Voters are headed slowly and for the most part peacefully to the polls elsewhere in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The capital, Kinshasa, is where at least 2 people have been killed in violence that began on Saturday. But so far things seem calm. Tensions are high, though, after a last-minute scramble to prepare for the vote, with rivals of the incumbent President Joseph Kabila alleging irregularities and bias by the National Electoral Commission. For more on the Democratic Republic of Congo, we are now joined by Thierry Vircoulon, Central Africa Director for the International Crisis Group. Thierry, thanks so much for your time. We are getting conflicting reports as to the sanctity of these elections, whether they are free, whether there's intimidation. We know of some violence in Kinshasa already, and there's already allegations of electoral fraud, that there are ballots that have been stuffed into ballot boxes with the name of Joseph Kabila, those kinds of stories coming out.
Yes, there are actually some allegations about fraud. They mainly come from the stronghold of the opposition, and there was some violence reported in the Kasai, which is the home province of the leader of the opposition, Etienne Tshisekedi, but also in some other part of the country, mainly in the western part of the DRC. But I think at this stage, what is characterizing this election is definitely disorganization. We cannot yet be sure about fraud, but we can already be sure about a certain level of disorganization. I was told today that actually a lot of voters that are showing up in voting stations don't find the names on the list of voters, and they are sent to other voting stations. And this has the potential to create a big problem.
A big problem, obviously. We have the history of the 2006 elections, where we saw the outcome contested, violence erupting, a bit of instability. Investors don't want to see that. Aid agencies don't want to operate in an environment like that. Have authorities taken the necessary steps to ensure not just credibility, but safety post the vote?
I think the whole electoral process hasn't been managed very well, and indeed, as you're saying, what is now important is that actually the announcement of the result will be managed well. We have witnessed a very worrying level of violence on Saturday in Kinshasa, the capital of the DRC. Therefore, I think the 2 coming weeks are going to be very tense in Kinshasa, but also maybe in other towns in the country. And definitely security will be stepped up. If we look at the example of what happened actually in 2006, it's definitely around the time of the announcement of the result that the tension is at its climax.
The United Nations released a Human Development Index, as they always do, and the DRC ranks as the worst country to live in, the worst country in the world. What do leaders have to do to improve on the human conditions there?
I think the DRC has definitely a huge challenge. We must remember that this country has collapsed. It's regarded as a collapsed state actually since the early 90s, since the time of Mobutu. And then after, there has been a very long war in the DRC. So it's a post-conflict country that have huge development and poverty challenges. And it's clear actually that the budget of the DRC, for instance, which is between $7 and $8 billion, is totally insufficient and unable to meet the development needs. We're talking about a country of between 60 and 70 million people and a state budget of $7–8 billion only. The neighboring country of Congo-Brazzaville, for instance, has a state budget of $24 billion. So you can see the difference. I think the Congolese authorities must really now introduce governance reform if they really want to develop the country. They have to walk the talk because, of course, in 2006, when the first democratic election happened, there were a lot of promises that were made in terms of change of governance.
Obviously, this is one of Africa's most well-endowed countries minerally. So investors have continued to flock into this market for the minerals, for the opportunities there. With growth at 6% thereabouts, can we expect the economy to grow, to rise, irrespective of the political conditions?
No, I think the political conditions are very important. The DRC is definitely what we call a geological scandal because it's a very rich country in terms of natural resources. But actually, even if investors, as you said, came to the DRC, they also left very quickly when the 2008 economic crisis happened. We must remember that at that time, 75 mining companies shut down activities in the Katanga province, which is a big mining province. So the DRC is actually very vulnerable to the evolution of the market and, of course, to the business environment. We must remember that the DRC is also at the bottom of the list of countries when you look at the doing business index. I think the DRC is now ranked at 178 out of 183 countries.
Yeah, absolutely. We do know that FDI has improved 10 times since the global crisis. We're seeing investments over 2 billion flowing into the economy. Where are they going, these investments? Is it still traditional areas like mining, or are we seeing new avenues emerge?
Well, I think mining is definitely the traditional sector where where FDI is going. But telecommunication is also an important sector. It's growing. And of course, the trade. Generally speaking, there's a lot of trade activities in the eastern part of the country because Eastern Congo is definitely oriented to the economies of East Africa and more integrated into the economies of East Africa. So trade is growing in all the border towns, Lubumbashi, Goma, Bukavu. When you go to those cities, you really see all the developments. I think housing also in those cities and in Kinshasa is booming. There are a lot of private construction that are done.
Okay, let's talk about other areas because we're told that the country has over 2,000 kilometers of river and all of that surrounded by forestry. So great opportunities for agriculture. Are the authorities seeing the country as the breadbasket of Southern Africa?
Well, I don't think there is a lot of focus about agricultural development. Agriculture is actually very important as a tool to alleviate poverty. It is regarded by the economists who are studying the DRC as actually the sector that will help to alleviate poverty. There's a lot of water, there's a lot of land to cultivate, but unfortunately in the DRC you only have subsistence farming. The big plantation that existed before actually ran down and are not performing anymore. So what is needed in agriculture is a lot of capital because it's also a huge country and infrastructure. That is a key constraint for the DRC economy. It is the deficit of infrastructure.
Obviously, we've heard that from our analysts throughout the day. Business is calling for roads, it's calling for rail. What about the prospect of PPPs? If the government doesn't have a big budget, doesn't have very steady revenue sources, why doesn't business just take the lead?
Yes, actually the state budget mainly relies on custom revenue. I think custom revenue made between 30 and 50% of state revenues. So that means they're also very vulnerable to the mood of the traders, to what's going on in the region. As I said before, I think really what is key for the development of the DRC is infrastructure. You can, when you live in Kinshasa, you can only go to 2 major towns in the province by road. You need to have a plane to move into the country. Actually air safety is a big concern in that country. This is a country with the size of Europe and who has big needs of road and of a reliable railway system. The railway system has also collapsed, and in this field there is basically no investor.
Where are we going to see contestation in business? Because we're told that DRC is now tapped into oil reserves. With investment, we could see 2 million barrels of oil flowing per day. How would this oil economy be managed? Because we've also seen a bit of uncertainty in mining contracts, reviews of licenses, issues, those kinds of issues. Is the oil economy going to be the next opportunity, but also the big area of contestation here?
Well, the DRC is a small oil producer. Actually, they're exploiting oil on the western part of the country along the coast in the province called Bakongo, and the production is still quite small. What has been discovered lately is actually a big oil reserve at the border of the DRC and Uganda on the Lake Albert. But this still is not exploited. An exploitation hasn't even started on the Ugandan side of the lake, which is actually the easier side if you need to work. Definitely the business environment is a problem. It's been a problem for the mining companies. They were involved in the mining review that actually lasted 2 years, from 2007 to 2009. And First Quantum, the Canadian company, lost its concession after that mining review. What happened in the mining sector actually may also happen in the oil sector. And in June this year, the Congolese authorities have actually announced an audit of the joint venture of Gécamines. Gécamines is the big state mining company in Canada and has got a lot of joint venture with private companies. And the mining companies were very surprised because they've already been through a mining review, and now they are told that there will be an audit of the joint venture.